By giving people the flexibility to work on other projects or to get a little bit more sleep, that actually brings them better productivity, quality of work, physical health, mental health, and focus.
Oh my God, Carl, you just gave the FP&A solution, the FP&A equation around balance. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for the brand new Collectiv Conversations. I'm your host, Chris Ortega, and today I'm talking with Carl Seidman, who's the founder of Seidman Financial, and this episode's about how to develop a balanced FP&A career. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for having me.
I know balancing an FP&A career, both of us have had experience of being in FP&A and growing up in the FP&A finance profession. Looking back over your career, what is that one thing that just resonates so well in terms of balancing an FP&A career?
Well, I think that one of the major points that we need to have as finance professionals is understand how our career and our job is influenced by all kinds of other factors going on in our lives. So even though you may have the competence and the confidence and the skills to be able to execute your job effectively, if you have other kinds of pressures or distractions going on in your life, that can influence your job and your work positively and negatively. So I think just constantly having an idea in terms of where you're focusing, where you're putting your energy is vital to being as productive and focused as you can be.
I remember a post that you made a couple of weeks ago where, you encountered some things personally that affected your health. There's so many external things that an FP&A person is dealing with, personal, professional, health-wise, emotionally. How do you balance all of that to maintain those different forms of mental, physical, and emotional health?
Yeah, I think that so much has to do with acknowledging who you are, what environment you work within, and setting appropriate boundaries. Because it's important to step outside of your work, take a look in and say, am I focusing and prioritizing what's most important in my life? And that may change over time. So early in your career, you may focus on getting on certain projects. And later in your career, you might say, well, I want to become more specialized. And then still later, you might want to say, well, I want to focus on my leadership development. So recognizing what's really important to you and setting the boundaries, both for yourself of saying, what am I going to allow myself to do, as well as those people around you of saying, this is what's important to me. How can I align my self-interests and my desires with what the firm or the company or the individual wants as well? So it's a constant revisitation of what environment you're in, what boundaries you're setting, and making sure that you're all aligned the right way.
You're 100% right. When I started off as a junior FP&A, right? My boundaries were not even there. I was anytime I got a project, I wanted to prove my worth, right? For those early people, early in their career, maybe they're 1 to 3 years out of school, right? How do they get that balance? How do they set those boundaries with those stakeholders, with their own, even maybe their own ambition? How do you do that?
Well, it's tough. I think back to the beginning of my career, which you're pushing me to think back a long time ago. But when I first started my career, I was a go-getter. I was very assertive. Mm-hmm. I was aggressive in terms of what I wanted to do with my own development, and it was very important to me that others looked at me as saying, Carl's the go-to guy. Carl will get this done. Carl's the reliable one. But the problem of that is if you're constantly seen as the go-to person, well, then you're going to always get all the opportunities, which, while is a good thing, it can also be very overwhelming. When you're seen almost like you're the workhorse, people are going to selfishly say, I want Chris on my team. I want Carl on my team. While great for opportunity, it can be very overwhelming. There can be a tremendous amount of pressure. And while you might think, well, that's a good thing, they're looking out for me, a lot of times they're not necessarily looking out for you. They're looking out for themselves on their project, how they can get the best team. And you say, well, that's a good thing, right? It is and it's not, right? So you get on the good opportunities and the good projects, but you're getting pulled in 100 different directions by the people who are largely looking out for themselves and their own projects. So you've got to always be cognizant and self-aware of saying, is this project aligning me up for the next one that I actually want to be on? If I'm working with this person, is this the person who I like working with? And if I work with them, will they be able to refer me to another director or another manager? You always have to be aware of, is this moving me in the direction that I want my career to take? And then as your career moves in that direction, is this moving me in the direction that I want my personal life to take? They always need to be, for the most part, very, very congruent.
Oh, Carl, man, like that's a fire moment right there. Totally fire talking about how when you're that go-getter and you're like that MVP that you mentioned, right? Like you're the first person that when any business partner, any stakeholder that you work with, when they think about finance, you are synonymous with that. And you love to be in that position. But I found myself plenty of times in my career where I felt like every problem I needed to come up with every solution for it, right? That's not sustainable, right? Is being the go-to source for everybody's problems. Like you find yourself just constantly being almost like an air traffic controller where you're like, I gotta land this plane and this plane's over here. Definitely my priorities around what balance was, what around being that MVP was, it changed, right? And when you're in that mid manager, it's like the MVP is like your team now, right? And now you find yourself balancing like, how do I individually contribute, but also how am I bringing up a team to have those core values? So to those managers, what would be some advice that you would give them as they like maybe first time leaders coming into leadership, or they've been seasoned leaders and they're looking to find that sustainability and their balance in their career? What would be some advice you would give them?
Yeah, one of the biggest obstacles that I think and that I see and that I hear mid-level managers encounter is you develop yourself and you establish yourself as the technical go-to person, that smart person that's super reliable. But then you get into a management role or even a director role, and it's this flip of saying, okay, well, if I'm not the technical person anymore, then what am I? The way that I look at an FP&A manager or director is an enabler. The person who is enabling the team to get the work done that needs to get done by elevating them to do the work that you would do if you were in their position. So if you've got a team of, let's say, 4 people, and you say, well, back in the day, I would have done 2 or 3 of these roles. Well, that's not your responsibility anymore. Your responsibility is to make sure that those 4 people are set up to succeed, and you make it safe for them to take the risks and grow and make those accidents or those risks safe for them to take.
Oh my God, Carl. Like, I love another fire moment, the enablement aspect of it, right? I think a lot of times, and look, I'll be telling everybody, I made the mistake when I moved from that MVP person that you talked about to that leader. And where I made the mistake is that I thought it was all about like, hey, I was able to do these projects. I was able to get these wins, right? And it was like, for me, I felt as a leader, every time my team came to me, I had to provide a solution for them, right? I was the problem solver, not the enabler, like you mentioned, right? And to me, to those leaders watching it, that is a critical step in leadership. Like, once you start shifting your mindset away from it's not about me and it's about we, and that we element is only going to be as strong as you teaching your team and empowering them, right? And enabling them, right? Like giving them the latitude to learn. That is one of the most critical like steps that I think about making a transition. And when you talked about that enablement aspect of it, it's not just enablement in terms of like the practical knowledge, it's enablement in giving them an opportunity to fail. It's enablement in professional development, which I think is really important. And it's also enablement of like giving people the freedom to go do what they need to do to be successful, right? And a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders fail to make that leap of that jump because they still focus on that me, not that we mindset. So I love that you talked about it from an enablement perspective.
Yeah, and if you're going to be in an organization that's growing and evolving, you recognize you have to let go and give that empowerment and autonomy to other people. And if you think back to the beginning of your career, and I think back to the beginning of mine, it was those managers and those directors that gave us the opportunities, saying, I know that I'm exposed now because trusting them to get it done, but I'm going to trust Chris and Carl to ask the questions where they need to and rely upon the other people where they have to. And that's how they're going to get smarter, and that's how they're going to elevate too.
Facts. And I love it, like transitioning over to like, Carl, you have led Seidman Financial for over 10 plus years. How, when someone makes that transition, whether they stay professionally or go into their own, solo entrepreneurship or their own like side hustle opportunity, how are they able to keep that same balance as well?
When I look back on the earlier parts of my career, I remember thinking it was completely normal and okay for me to be working 55 to 65 plus hours a week. That was completely normal and completely acceptable. And it's not that I have any issue with anybody who's doing that, but I've got young kids now. I still will work those hours on occasion, but I have to have greater control and be in greater charge of the way that my business and my work looks. Even taking a look 6+ years ago, before my kids were even in the picture, I was willing to do certain types of work that I'm just not willing to do now. And the reality of this statement and this philosophy is life is full of different chapters. So where you might be in your 20s might be different than where you are in your 30s, which might be different than where you are in your 40s and beyond. And that's okay. That's the reality of our work. And specifically in my business, what's long been very important for me in getting that balance, even what we just talked about of if you're a manager and director, how do you empower your team? My philosophy and my business values are, I'm not going to go into a company and roll up my sleeves and do everything. I'm going to go into a company and I'm going to develop and coach you as my client so that I work myself out of a job. So instead of me doing everything, I say, Chris, as my client, I'm going to make it so that I elevate you, I empower you, I enable you, so that you can take exactly the scope of work you need to do and go into it with 100% confidence or 90% confidence. And having that kind of philosophy and that kind of mentality not just aligns and is congruent with the lifestyle that I want to have and what I want my business to look like, but it makes my clients that much more happy because they say, Carl is not so indispensable, we can never let him go. He's empowering and enabling us so that we can get to the next chapter of our business life.
I love that, man. I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that's so important as we all think about whatever hats that we're wearing in finance, the hats that we're wearing as in our families, the hats that we're wearing in our communities, right? We have to make sure we're having that balance of like, how is what I'm doing scalable, right? That's the key thing is like, a lot of times organizations don't think about the scale in what they're doing. And that's 100% of what you talked about, man. So, so important.
Yeah. And as a business person and as an entrepreneur, you might say, well, Carl, don't you need this recurring revenue? Don't you always need to make sure that there's good cash flow in your business? And the answer to that is, of course. But the way that I look at it is if I solve a client's problems and they're happy with it and they now own the process or the implementation that I've done, they're going to think about me the next time they need help. Or the next time that they encounter a business or a colleague that needs assistance, they're going to say, Carl's the guy. He's going to come in, he's going to give us the solution, he's going to make sure that we have the proper footing to be able to take this on our own. And why shouldn't that be the goal and the values of a business consultancy?
Fire, man. That is the goal right there. Carl, I think one last question I want to talk to you about is like, what would be your advice to give to those professionals as they think about starting that conversation to get back on the road of having more balance in their career?
First and foremost, most important answer I would give would be honesty and transparency.
Definitely.
When you bottle something up and you keep it to yourself, it will start to manifest in your performance, in your productivity, in the quality of your work, possibly your physical health, and probably your mental health. So if you're working with somebody, whether it's a colleague or a client or somebody who may be more senior, is it's sucking up some of your pride and being honest with both yourself as well as for them. Now, where I think there is a disconnect between what we may expect out of ourselves and what our colleagues and clients might expect is they might say, well, I just want you to get the job done. I just want you to work as hard as you absolutely need to work and just get it done. But the problem is some people, they don't work well when they're working as late and as hard and as under pressure as they possibly can. That's not the most effective way of getting work done.
Right.
And what's perhaps ironic is by giving people the flexibility to work on other projects or pursue other interests or to take some time off or to get a little bit more sleep, that actually brings them better productivity, quality of work, physical health, mental health, and focus. And so it's almost like taking away is what creates the multiplier. Rather than giving people more work and more pressure and expect more out of them, taking away and saying, creating this space to be will actually make me better at doing what I do. The subtraction, which ultimately leads to multiplication, is beneficial to my people, is beneficial to myself, and is beneficial to others who may be either directly or indirectly involved with this person. So it's very contradictory to the way that society and our work environment exists, but it's something that we need to be far more cognizant and aware of.
Oh my God, Carl, you just gave the FP&A solution, the FP&A equation around balance, right? Add in your honesty and transparency, minus out the demands and the perspective to multiply your balance. That is literally it. Like, I've never shied away from the difficult conversation, but like you said, every professional, you gotta be honest with yourself, man. You gotta come and say, you know what? I'm gonna raise my hand and say I'm working too much or I'm not working too much at all. Like this whole quiet quitting thing is something that we talked about, right? Which to me is those are those professionals that are just like, hey, I've tuned out. I'm gonna do the C-level work. I'm gonna do the bare minimum and fly under the radar, which is not going to be scalable in the long term. Because exactly what you talked about, right? You're gonna that discomfort, that discontentment, that lack of ambition, it's gonna follow in other ways of your life, right? Like it's gonna show up maybe at home, it's gonna show up with your friends. Like you have to make sure you find that balance. And I think the most important thing to add to what you said, Carl, is that when it comes to developing and balancing your career, you have to treat your career like you're the own CEO of your career, right? I talk about this all
100%.
the time. Is like, you've got to own your career. There's never going to be a business. There's never going to be a manager. There's never going to be another coworker that is as much invested in your career than you. Own
100%.
your career and then also own like those check-in points, right? Like as you're progressing, those check-in points are going to change, right? I know for me right now, as a leading my own business, like I want to do impactful work that helps enable others, right? And I took this from a teaching that you gave me, Carl. Is like that's what I want to focus my time on, right? I want to be doing impactful work that's going to create value for others, and that's where I want to be. That's a whole completely different boundary as what we talked about earlier than it was earlier in my career, middle of my career, and later stage. So thank you so much, Carl, Seidman. It's been a pleasure to have you here on Collectiv Conversations. If people want to go follow you, check out other things that you're doing, where can they learn more about you and connect with you, Carl?
Right. The best place is my website, which is seidmanfinancial.com. And I'm also a fairly active user of LinkedIn.
Fairly active. No, you're like the top on the LinkedIn, man. When it comes to LinkedIn, if you don't have top of your LinkedIn post of Carl Seidman, you're missing out on insights, you're missing out on information, you're missing out on everything. So definitely make sure to follow, connect with him. Carl, it has been an absolute pleasure, brother. I learn and grow, and I think I speak for all global accounting, finance, FP&A, and CFO professionals, man. We are thankful to have you in the community. Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And thank you all for being part of Collectiv Conversations. Be sure to check out the many links that we'll have in the description so you can learn more about all the guests that we're having. And make sure you connect with us on Collectiv Conversation on all the different socials. Until next time, be great.